Welcome to the 2020 Education Series, Mind the Development Gap Office Session. My name is Sarah Crute, Executive Director with the JP Morgan Chase Commercial Term Lending Group and Vice Chair of NAIOP Programs Committee. The goal of this year's series was to provide a roadmap for managing real estate development risk and uncertainty in today's market and strategies for charting the future comeback post-COVID. We have a few program announcements before we get started here. First, a thank you to our series sponsors, our sustaining sponsor, Transwestern, our construction corner sponsor, the Whites Company, and our supporting sponsor, Polsinelli. I'd also like to recognize the Education Series program coordinators, our programs chair, Brian Dietz, Joe Zanone, Bob Blodgett, Lorinda Frederick, Ben McKay, and Jody McCulloch. I'll acknowledge our program panelists here shortly, but first, a few comments about today's program. This will be an open discussion format, and we'll begin with an office market overview from Stephanie Lawrence, followed by a Q&A moderated by Stephanie. Our audience members are encouraged to submit their questions for the panel using the Q&A function from their Zoom toolbar. Links to the speaker bios are available on the NAIOP website, and a reminder that today's program will run until 9:30. So panelists, please turn on your videos for a quick introduction. All right. Today's special guest panelists include Stephanie Lawrence, NAIOP past president and today's program moderator and senior managing director with Granite Properties. Dan Feagans, project director at Brinkmann Constructors. Jamie Gard, executive managing director with Newmark. David Haltom, vice president with Patrinely Group. And NAIOP past president and board member, Celeste Tanner, chief development officer with Confluent Development. And Chris Zlocki, executive vice president of global occupier services at Colliers International. Welcome panelists. As a reminder, please mute your mic when you're not actively presenting or participating in the Q&A. And Stephanie, take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am really honored to be the moderator of this panel of this great group of folks in different segments of the development market. Sarah said I was going to do an office overview, which as soon as she said that, I'm like, uh-oh, I didn't really prepare for that. But the real market overview for right now is that not a lot of data points to know really where our office market is headed. I mean, we are seeing a trickle of tours start. We are getting some deals done, but they're very short-term in nature and not a lot of trends to really tell you what we think the office market is doing. And I'm going to let Chris and Jamie talk a little bit about that in a minute relative to what they're seeing on the demand, because they're really the experts. What I thought I'd just share a little bit about, Granite Properties is a private equity firm that is in 5 cities, and those are Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, L.A., and Denver. And we are currently about 10 million square feet in assets, 1.3 million of it's in Denver. And coming into 2020, we had a $2 billion development pipeline that we were really excited about. And those included 2 deals out of the ground, 2 deals in entitlement, and 3 deals that were in pre-dev and planning to go spec. Then sort of the Friday the 13th, March 13th hit, everything changed. And so we quickly changed our attention to what do we do with the assets we have out of the ground? What do we need to do differently in response to the pandemic? What do we do on the projects that we had in process that we don't think we would go spec on today? And then really more importantly, what do we do with our existing portfolio to address pandemic concerns? And so we quickly pivoted a lot of our construction group to focusing on those issues and have spent a good bit of time and capital on retrofitting some of our buildings with ionization and higher filtration to further the health and wellness of our customers. So on the one hand, we're making progress responding to the pandemic. On the other hand, we got a $2 billion pipeline that evaporated pretty quickly relative to what we could do go forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And then I'm really looking forward to hearing their thoughts on office demand, what Celeste and David are doing on their development projects, because this has never been a better time for an education series on what is actually happening in development on the office front today. So with that, I'm just going to go in order of how I see you on my screen. So Dan, if you, with Brinkmann Constructors, if you could just do a brief introduction of yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. Once again, Dan Feagans with Brinkmann Constructors. I'm one of 3 project directors in our Denver office. Those of you not familiar with Brinkmann Constructors, we are a nationwide general contractor. We have offices in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Denver. We have performed construction projects across the country in 42 different states. You know, I was asked to share some positive news of 2020, and we do have some positive news to share, so it's not all doom and gloom out there. You know, although the office sector may be struggling for a lot of the reasons that everybody's aware of, this will be Brinkmann's 6th consecutive record year in revenue and growth, which is phenomenal. I think it's a direct result of being in the right markets across the nation, and Denver being one of them. I think you'll continue to hear throughout this event today that, you know, the work's still there, the opportunities are still there, the growth is still there. We just probably took a small pause in all of that. So now a lot of our work is in other markets besides office, but I think it's indicative of the Denver area. Brinkmann, we will top over $700 million this year in total revenue across the country, with about 1/3 of that here in the Denver local market.
Great, thank you, Dan. Just for the rest of the group, I did ask the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their company, and then give a 2020 highlight. Hopefully something was positive. So Dan, thank you for starting us off with that. And just a quick question, where is you look like you're in the office, but where are you guys working right now?
Yeah, since construction itself was deemed essential, our guys in the field, boots on the ground, they never stopped working. So praise to them and thank them so much for, you know, going to work at risk more than the rest of us. But we got back, we worked from home, the office staff did, March, April, and then call it guilt, call it the responsible thing to do. We came back to work in May with the right precautions. So we've been back in the office since May, supporting our field, supporting our staff and our clients.
Great. David, you're next on my screen. So David Haltom with Patrinely.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. Firstly, thank you also to the NAIOP team for hosting this morning and to everyone for joining online. I'm David Haltom, Vice President for Patrinely Group, a privately held Houston-based development, management, and investment firm, active in about a dozen markets nationwide, mostly in office, spec, and build-to-suit, multifamily, and then increasingly in the industrial space. I'm the Rocky Mountain lead for our firm, and our big initiative in Denver is a project that we're developing in partnership with USAA Real Estate downtown, Block 162, which is a 30-story, 600,000 square foot full spec office tower, which is nearing completion and delivery at the turn of the year downtown. I will confess we did not factor in the impact of a global viral pandemic into our underwriting for a full spec 600,000 square foot office tower. But we're seeing a gradual and I would say accelerating thaw after the market went into deep freeze earlier this year. And we're very encouraged that we're seeing an increase in tenant interest, in-person tours, RFPs, and proposal re-engagement. Including with firms that had gone into hibernation, if you want to put it that way, a little earlier this year, and then have since reemerged and re-engaged with us. In terms of where I've personally been working recently and where we've been working recently, I've had a bit of an unusual opportunity to work both from home, which is where I am now, but also from our project construction office operated by Swinnerton, our general contractor, who's been managing and overseeing 250 to 300 workers on site every day of the work week throughout the pandemic. It speaks to something that Dan was referring to just a moment ago. And Swinnerton has managed through these pretty difficult circumstances very impressively, keeping the train on the tracks and the schedule intact with remarkably little drama, for which we're very grateful. And echoing what Dan said a few minutes ago about his own team at Brinkmann, I'll say that we've been very impressed with every one of our contractors, subcontractors, and workers on site throughout the last several months. And frankly, grateful to the governor and the mayor for enabling that to be the case, because that's not been the case in all of the markets across the US, including some other ones that we've operated in. And then in terms of some other positive news from this year, our company is a little bit unusual for the fact that we've also commenced and broken ground on a new spec office building during the last several months, most notably a 325,000 square foot office deal in downtown Salt Lake City that commenced in July. So we're very excited for that. It's about a third pre-leased, and we're looking forward to being in that market and talking a little bit about what the future holds for Denver on this panel.
Great. Thank you, David. Jamie Gard with Newmark, you're up next.
Morning, thanks. I am back in the office, which is also funny because people are coming up to talk to me, which hasn't happened in 7 months. So excited to be back here and on my 9,000th Zoom call. Highlights of 2020, if you haven't seen the paper or you can see my name on the screen, Newmark has finally taken the world's longest name and shortened it back to one word. So that's a highlight for us. I've shaved 4 strokes off my golf game and spent more time with my wife and kids than probably should be allowed, at least as my wife says. So now I'm back in the office. I've been in the business 27 years. I help tenants find homes and help landlords find tenants. And I think Chris and I were talking, or Chris was talking, I was listening, but I share his thinking in that we're excited about where Denver and Colorado is positioned. It may be tough here in the short run, but I think in the long run, we are going to be a massive beneficiary from coastal cities.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Next up is Celeste Tanner with Confluent Development.
Thanks, Stephanie. So Confluent Development is a privately held real estate development management investment firm, similar to some of the other groups on the call. And we actually operate in multiple asset classes and have really focused our platform in maintaining that asset diversity. So we are very active right now in senior living, retail, industrial, office, also entering into the multifamily space as well. We're all based in Denver, but we actually have active projects across those asset classes, really in all 4 corners of the country right now. So from Washington State to Maine, Southern California to Florida. And it's been an exciting ride for sure, especially operating in asset classes like office, retail, and senior. But I will say, on the positive notes for 2020, we have remained active. Our senior living space continues to receive residents and stay safe. And we continue to sign leases with our retail tenants. So I think that there's still positive news out there. As a company, what I'm most excited about this year, though, is that we really focused our efforts as this pandemic hit to say, what can we do to give back to our community? And we really focused more on that and to cultivate a spirit of giving across the organization. And so if I'm most excited about anything this year, it's our contributions to Volunteers of America for Meals on Wheels, if it's feeding kids that were going hungry when they were out of school, even supporting a children's center in upstate New York. And I think, we're one of many organizations that did that this year. But I think that's actually a highlight for all of us and something I hope we all continue to do even post-pandemic.
That's a great point, Celeste. That's a great highlight. I think all of us should look for ways to give. There's so many people in need. So
Yeah.
Great point. Okay, Chris with Colliers. Last panelist, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Stephanie. So like Jamie, I represent the other side of the house, the occupier services side. I'm the global head of what we call client experience, and really focus on enterprise clients to help them from an advisory perspective. At Colliers, we're one of the largest real estate advisory services globally. over 400 offices, 4 billion plus in revenue, 20,000 or getting close to 20,000 employees. So we've doubled our growth every 5 years since 2010. So really just purely focused on the advisory side for both occupiers and certainly landlords, owners. Little bit about where I'm at. I'm sitting at my home near Union Station, or my loft near Union Station. My last flight was on March 12th. The year before, I flew 200,000 miles across the globe, working with our global occupiers to help them think about what the future of their business would be. Not thinking about pandemic, but as times were great, looking at globalization, looking at continuing to help corporates think about where they're going to position themselves. Since then, my role, I guess, over the last year, the pivot, like everybody else, I think to focus on 4 things, what we see as most important for corporates right now, or occupiers of space. The first is helping them think through frameworks for decision making. I know we're going to have some questions about that, but rethinking how they look at their portfolio across what I would call, we used to use hub, spoke, satellite, and Denver would fall into any one of those buckets depending on the company. But now we're using the term network, similar to technology, which draws in virtual space, flex, certainly office, and then sort of ownership structures that play into that as well. And so over the last 6 months, our teams have pivoted to really looking at the impact of work from home. How do you now play that into your occupancy strategy as you move forward? And it's been exciting. And I think there's a lot of great opportunities that are going to emerge for everyone on this call, because the bottom line is the office is going to change. It isn't what we know it today. And I think it's dramatically going to shift for how people use the office and what the office actually ends up becoming in the next 3 to 5 years. So really excited to be in this panel.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into our questions. And the way that we've organized this is we're going to start with Chris to follow on the discussion he just the things he was just saying, and Jamie, who are really on the occupier side and trying to understand what our future in office looks like from a demand side. So with that, since I'm going to change up the order a little bit on the panel, so the questions we sent out, but a lot of folks have touched on Denver as a geographic preference and why we might be positioned better than other markets. And so if maybe Chris, you could continue with just what you're seeing from an occupier standpoint relative to Denver's position. You continue to read about relocations. Is that trend that's going to accelerate? If you can just give us your thoughts on what you're hearing from the occupier side on Denver's position and geographic preferences of the tenant base out in the market today. Chris, if you could start, and then Jamie, if you want to chime in.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. And it's a timely question. I continue to smile. I moved to Denver, I think going on 15 years ago, and I did my own site selection, being the wonky location strategist. My wife and I really loved Denver, and we had no roots here. We had some family and friends who lived here, or friends who lived here now and family, but said, where's the city that really sort of blends the future sort of where business could be going, growth opportunities, great access to the environment without being sort of constrained with high cost and other infrastructure challenges. And so what I love about I think the silver lining of what's happening today, when I look at our location strategists and our teams that are helping clients think through these problems, it's all about labor and workforce that we're focused on, and having access to great talent and doing it at an affordable rate. So when you're starting to look at sort of the emergence of the tech sector, in the continued emergence, Colorado wasn't in the top 10 in terms of technology, media, telecom 5 years ago. Now we're on most lists, or all lists, we're somewhere between 5 and 10 in having that capability. And so, as Jamie said, when you look at the coasts, it becomes a really great location to blend finding great talent at a relatively affordable cost and having sort of availability to that talent, given the millennial and Z-Gen growth we've exhibited, and at an affordable rate. Denver, whether it's downtown, south, or out, on the Boulder corridor, it provides a ton of opportunities for continued acceleration. And we've seen in the news some of the more recent relocations. I just continue to believe that we will see an abundance of corporates really not think of Denver at what used to be what I would call a regional hub, but really see this as a major core and a center for their continued employment growth.
Thanks, Chris. Jamie, turning to you with the same sort of geographic theme. One thing we continue to hear from different sources is whether or not there'll be a resurgence of the suburbs. So Chris is talking more about the network across national geographies, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what you're seeing both on the landlord rep side and the tenant rep side relative to suburbs versus urban locations.
I think we're seeing a faster reoccupancy in the suburbs, maybe because it's a little more approachable, more low rise, parking's easier, maybe less reliance on mass transit. But I don't think downtown's going anywhere. In the short run, the suburbs may outperform, but I think in the long run we go back to, at least in Denver, they've been in relative balance. CBD maybe gets all the accolades and is the star, but statistically they kind of both hang in there. The surprising market is actually Cherry Creek. Cherry Creek is probably has more activity than it's had. Rents are holding, maybe increasing. High quality product is filling up. And it's kind of it might be the pandemic beneficiary, and there's probably a couple others too, Northwest, if you've got life sciences, all these little infill pockets, there are still bright spots, even though, the main markets are suffering from a lack of demand.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Another thing we all hear about and read about is one of the reasons I asked at the beginning is if you've been working from home or in the office. What is the impact, do you guys think, from a work from home perspective long-term relative to office demand? Chris, why don't we start with
Jamie, and then maybe, or do you want to take that one? You want to start?
Jamie, go for it.
Okay. I don't know if I'm in the minority. I don't think there is going to be a change. We've seen a lot of discussion, particularly around architects. Fortunately, there's none on our panel. I think it's good for business to talk about changing shapes and sizes and distances and bottlenecks and all of the things that we've spent 7 months talking about. But really, I think the world is waiting for a vaccine, and with 46 of them in, second and third stage trials, I'm fairly confident. I think we're going to end up with one. Whether that's, November 4th or March, who knows? But I think ultimately there'll be a vaccine and people are going to go predominantly back to normal. I guess I'd like to hear Chris. He may have a totally different opinion.
Well, no, I think just riffing on that. I use the term "you can't unsee that," right? With work from home, it's kind of like we've learned so much from it, that the good, the bad, the challenges, the opportunities, right? It's finally been tested in a robust way. Every company had to do it. Every knowledge worker's gone through some version of it. What we're hearing, and we've done a lot of customer survey or client surveys. We had one survey, I think we had 10,000 respondents, that 50% of the employees say that they would like to continue to work from home, up to 80% said maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So I don't think it's going to be this work from home or work in the office. I think it's going to be a blend again, that the work, depending on what the office is moving forward and what it's meant to do, I think there's going to be more flexibility in terms of having some of your day or some of your week work from home, and certainly come in to meet, learn, train, meet clients, lead meetings, all the good things you want to do in business, and leverage it for the office for its most collaborative and functional needs. I think that the work, we're using the term virtual work, is going to be here to stay, whether it's a third place or whether it's in the home. We think companies see that as an opportunity to rethink what the office might be. I'm not saying there'll be more or less square footage. I don't think we're at a place to get into that debate, but I do think the way people work, going back to the employee, is really going to continue to shift. I also think the second thing is, in good companies, the employee will have a say in what that means, meaning this will become a significant attraction and retention strategy within sectors that say, we're going to give you the opportunity or flexibility to think of how to structure your workday and how that works. Now, that's not going to work at every level, but certainly the ability to get the best talent, the notion of flexibility is what's really changed as a result of this pandemic. And I think we'll continue to learn from and move post-COVID.
I think that's all right too, but I don't know that ends up in less space, which I think is the world's, in the real estate business's concern is, I know CB was a big champion of hoteling. I think people are selfish and we like our own space, and to the extent that we can still have that, and getting to a regimented 40 or 50% of your workforce that's only coming in every other day and you're back to this prescribed schedule, I don't think is going to be the future. I think you're right. People are going to work from home a day or two a week, but they're going to want to come back to their personal space. And net, that doesn't save you any square footage. It just hopefully makes your employees a lot happier and maybe puts more pressure on the office space. I think office before had to be a part of recruiting and retaining, and now it's even, if it's not a special place, why come? So if there's not great interaction and great amenities when you get there that you're comfortable and feel energized, then you are going to figure out a different place to go work.
It's interesting. There's a concept of choice that's kind of embedded in something that you guys are both referring to, Chris and Jamie. And it's playing out, Stephanie, to the questions you've asked already. This is playing out on a Denver market level, a Colorado level, as well as on an office level. And we're blessed to be in a market that is frankly different in terms of its aspirational appeal for the reasons that Chris and Jamie, you guys were referring to a few minutes ago. Jamie, your comment about if the office isn't worth going to, why go? I mean, I think we're benefiting from the same dynamics here in our market, in Denver. And Denver's not alone in that. You'll see that in Salt Lake City and in Boise, Idaho, and in other markets that are blessed with some of the characteristics that Denver offers in terms of its climate, in terms of its access to outdoor opportunities, and frankly, something that Chris and I were chatting about before the call, perhaps a low drama environment that differentiates us and certain other places from some of the more headline grabbing communities and states that we've all seen in the news recently. And I think all of that will accrue to the benefit over the mid to long term here in Denver and in Colorado.
Yeah, that's a great point, David.
I hope you don't mind me jumping in.
No, not at all.
I hope we're able to do that during this conversation.
Isn't meant to be super structured, but you actually brought up a great follow-on to what the next question is that we all three of you guys have said, I only want to go back to the office if it's worth going back to. And that's both how it feels, energy, who's coming in, but it's also what that office building offers. So my next question is, what are the key things that need to be in a new development today? Is that changed relative to the pandemic? Is the amenity requirements just the same as it's been, but what does the future look like relative to what an office building needs to offer its occupants?
If you don't mind, I've actually got some immediate thoughts on this by virtue of what we've heard directly on tenant tours at Block 162. And the context there is that we perceived this arms race in terms of tenant amenities prior to initiating our development a couple of years ago. And we needed some hooks to differentiate ourselves from within the community of other new Class A office product that was on the slate in Denver. And one of the ways that we're doing that is with an amenities package that we believe will help differentiate us. So a lot of our peer buildings, a lot of our very top end Class A office stock will have sort of a kit of parts. We'll have, a fitness center, maybe a conference room that can be utilized by tenants. Maybe it has a social lounge of some sort, and then perhaps some outdoor space. But where we saw a gap in the market was in coordinating all those, because most of them were tucked away in ancillary space, mezzanine levels, sort of separate here and there within the master development. We elevated those up on top of our garage podium with an indoor-outdoor component to each of them. And we did not do that anticipating the way that might be received in the immediate aftermath of a global viral pandemic. What we found is that indoor-outdoor element has been enormously popular amongst the tenants that we've taken through, who, if I may put it this way, in February, we were pitching folks and walking them through the space and saying, imagine a client event with 400 people up here. And now we've pivoted to imagine the social distancing and safety and airflow you can get in the same space. And, it speaks to something that's embedded within some of the comments that Chris and Jamie have already made, which is an acceleration of trends, an acceleration of previously existing trends that have been there, but as Chris referred to, they have not been tested in a robust way or a multidimensional way. And, seeing the impact that this amenities arms race that we were responding to has allowed us to have at Block 162, combined with just being a brand new building with clean slate space. So you can come in if and when you know what you want to design and design it. And that's something that not every other building can offer at this point. So I'm sure.
Yeah, David, I agree with you. I think, when we think of office space, we've all talked about pre-COVID, this continued pendulum shift back and forth on densities. And we all got a little crazy, I think, in creating these super dense spaces years ago. That pendulum was already moving back. And I think it will continue to move back to a sense of normalcy. There's still going to be cubicles, right? I don't think people are going to go to 100% hard wall environment with this, but I think you're going to go back to slightly larger areas. And that indoor outdoor space is now something that, to me, I think was a really great amenity to have that's now felt more essential as people are coming in. They want to have that sense of access to fresh air, and being able to move in and out of that space flexibly and have more room to spread out if they choose to. So I think all of those are spot on. The other piece for me that Stephanie, you mentioned it before, and what Granite's evaluating, but never in my life have I spoken so much about mechanical systems and what are you doing? What's special about what you're doing? What's your filtration? How are you treating the air? Are you purifying it in any way? What's happening there? I think everyone has become an indirect expert in air processes and flows through buildings now, and I think that's going to be a sustaining question, right? They want to. It's not just about near-term COVID health, but the overall wellness of occupants that are in your space, and the air we're breathing is the number one question I'm getting from people now.
So that actually led me to a question I was going to ask, and I'll direct this to David and to Celeste. So relative to mechanical systems, there's the amenities, and David just spoke to that, and obviously outdoor space has become much more important than it may have been in the past. So kudos to your development team, David, for having that vision and already having that in that outdoor space plan. But are you changing your plans for buildings in process that you can, and or ones that you are designing now to do things differently mechanically? And if so, what are you doing?
Celeste, do you want to take this first, or would you like me?
Oh, go for it. I'll chime in.
So short answer is that we're not radically changing anything from our formula. And I would say that that's due mostly to the fact that our formula has always been to deliver a top of market quality building. And that has meant that, for example, at Block 162, we have mechanical systems that already had incorporated capacity for additional air changes significantly over code, and already had MERV rated filters up to a certain level, and we were able to at relatively low cost switch those out for a higher rated filter without radically changing the system. We take great pride in our property management platform, and that team has been really front and center in our operating properties in trying to instill a sense of comfort and confidence in the tenants that if and when they want to return to the office, and frankly, not all of them are doing that until next year, that they'll be doing so into an environment that they feel is a safe one for them to reoccupy. I know, Stephanie, that your team has undertaken a very impressive platform upgrade with needlepoint bipolar ionization. I love saying that out loud.
I couldn't say that.
Yeah, well, it still gets me tongue-tied, as you could just hear. And at Block 162, we've got the ability for any tenant to go in and fit that in if that's something that they desire. So the flexibility that's offered for individual tenants to undertake the planning that they want to undertake is maybe something that I think will bear fruit. But at Block 162 specifically, we've gone and made some upgrades on our vertical transportation system. So we're very proud of being able to say now that you can, if you want, have a completely touch-free arrival sequence. Whether you're coming by automobile or on foot, you can enter the building, you can go into the elevator lobbies, you can go into the elevators thanks to a very high-end, cutting-edge custom smartphone app that we're developing with ThyssenKrupp right now. For Block 162, you can go all the way up into your office without touching anything if you want to. And how much that's really going to help versus how much that's something that we can advertise that some folks will respond positively to. I'm interested to see, but we have not been turning our buildings into secure lab grade environments or anything along those lines. We've instead been trying to operate and maintain a high quality apparatus that allows tenants to feel safe and comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? It feels 2020 feels like it's been a decade long, but we've really sort of been 7-8 months into this. And I think there's been a lot of experimentation that has been happening for people to figure out what's the right answer. And the best solutions I've heard are people who are approaching similar to what you're saying, David, that there's a balanced approach that says that we have a base system that is flexible and accommodating. And that's where we've been evolving as well. I think early on, there was a lot of discussion around gotta get as much fresh air in as possible, right? Whatever we can do to open up that fresh air intake, that's going to be the critical piece. And then we found out, well, that's actually really expensive, right? And tenants don't want to necessarily have to account for that. Is there a different strategy? And so we've experimented with UV. We actually put UV filters in our own office space to test it out. You can imagine on the senior living side, this has been a major focus too. The needlepoint bipolar ionization, I always mess that up too, is another strategy we've explored. But yeah, I mean, it starts with the basics. Have good filtration, right? Make sure that you don't have to go over the top to allowed criteria, but that you are, and I'm going to mess up the numbers, but I think if you're at a 6 or 7 on your MERV, you're at kind of a doctor's office level system. That, that's a positive, and I think that makes people feel good. The other piece of it that I think is interesting, is this a genuine question for the group? Not to take over your job stuff, but I'm curious what people are hearing relative to LEED versus WELL. And are people asking more questions about WELL standards now, given the current environment? I know there's a specific health and safety rating that has been issued out, and I've received several questions about that. Just as an ability, again, to your point on the touchless technology, David, can I have that sticker on my door that says that this building's been certified as a safe and healthy building, and that makes people comfortable when they walk in? I don't know if you've heard those questions. Has LEED taken a back seat and people want to know more about WELL, or has that even come up?
Well, and I'll just add, I'm going to just pass off the panelist role the moderator role to Celeste now. No, because people, I will add, we're having the same internal discussions, LEED versus WELL, and there is a little bit of a versus there, because when you do change your filtration, and particularly if you go up the MERV scale, that in itself creates higher energy utilization, just because it costs more to run those filters. And so a lot of LEED is energy conservation. And so there's a direct offset to those things. And it's going to be interesting to see. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris and to Jamie to answer the question on what are your occupants? What are your clients telling you is most important to them? And so, and hearing everything that David and Celeste are doing on their developments, is that hitting the mark for the current demand and what you see in the future? Or, and then the follow on is really whether or not you're hearing folks focus on wellness versus LEED, because I think for at least some period of time, it's going to be one or the other. I'm not sure you can do both, because some of the metrics are conflicting from what we're learning.
Yeah, I would say both are spot on. And it dovetails back to the last question. The way I would say from an occupier perspective is they're looking for, or what I think employees are going to be looking for, is a more holistic environment, amenities, infrastructure, real connection to the environment, to be able to get out in a meaningful way, out of the office, have that transparency in and out. But I do think the whole question now of attracting employees is going to fall into what's your fit well rating, what's your well rating of your, have you implemented this? It's going to, this has left a mark on sort of, is this a safe place for me to work moving forward? And it's not just going to be COVID, but we think we have to settle into the fact that this may happen again. And it may happen again in the next 3 to 5 years, given the way pandemics are like other natural disasters or other things that are emerging. We've seen it every 10 years happen. The frequency of this might continue. So as a result, I think if I'm, someone who's coming into the workplace, and this is going to be important because I grew up living through this as an adolescent or a young adult, that, I can't speak to whether it's LEED or WELL or any of the others, but they're going to want some assurance and rating. What are the things that you're doing from an air, light, air quality standpoint that are giving me the best place to be healthy and the most productive? And that's what I think the occupier of the future is going to be looking to, including an emphasis on sustainability and being able to say, how are these things put together in a real holistic sort of solution? And I think that's what major corporates certainly are going to be looking for as they continue to support their employees.
Jamie, do you have anything to add on that?
That is, part of that's incumbent on the base building, but part of that's incumbent on the tenant themselves to design the space in an appropriate way, and the tenant's architects to take on board some of those criteria. Our head of property management likes to talk about her role is to provide a platform for which the tenants to conduct their business. And we look at our buildings in a lot of the same way in terms of office. We're not there to be, paternalistic or to nanny tenants either. And so I think that's the context in which the framework is there for the office itself to be hopefully designed in a thoughtful and considerate way to undertake all these trends, both from a a health perspective, but also from a flexibility and working from home perspective, and then from a corporate culture and collaboration perspective. And how do you provide an environment that answers all those questions is a multi-part, multi-dimensional challenge.
Totally agree. I mean, that's why I use the term ecosystem. It's not one or the other. It's going to take everybody to, both on the tenant side as well as the landlord in partnership in being able to figure out what that means. So it makes total sense. I'm just presenting the perspective from where I think what tenants are going to be looking, or what employees are going to be looking for more than anything.
I had a quick question if I could jump in, Stephanie. Celeste did a great job jumping in, so I thought I'd follow suit and see if I could run the show. Quick question. So we're talking in general terms, right? What are the tenants wanting? What are the employees wanting? But from a product standpoint, obviously incorporating more efficient, more well-designed systems, mechanical systems, specifically in new buildings, is one approach. But are you guys hearing or seeing anything from your existing tenants or potential tenants on going into old buildings or current leases and upgrading the systems that are in the current buildings today?
I'll answer that just because this is what David referenced that Granite has done. And I referenced at the very beginning. So we immediately went to look at our filtration, everything, and ASHRAE has, who governs a lot of this, or at least is the standard that a lot of tenants will look to, really focused on the filtration. The MERV 13 was the standard. So we quickly looked at that, looked at how we could run because some of the older buildings, existing buildings, don't have mechanical systems that can run certain things very efficiently without really increasing operating costs. For example, having to change MERV 13 filters out every 2 weeks, which adds a lot of operating costs. Also, tenants don't want increased operating expenses. So that's why we went and did as much research as we could to understand the needlepoint bipolar ionization, and decided as a firm to move forward with that has had third-party testing that clean, through, and I don't know that, I'm not going to pretend to know the technology behind it, but through positive and negative ions, kills bacteria, or not, the viral air in the air 99% in the first 30 minutes that it exists. So it really is a way to have cleaner air. And then it adds between 4 to 5 to the filtration of a MERV 13. So you can, if we have a MERV 13, we do the ionization for MERV 18, and that's almost hospital grade. So that we did all of that because we wanted our customers to feel safe in their space. But, and as Celeste said earlier, not just because of current COVID, but because of just general wellness and feeling good in the buildings. So that's what we're doing in the existing buildings, but it's obviously much more efficient to do it to a ground up development that you can, start with a blanker slate. So that's what we're doing. And it's gotten great response because I think people we want people feeling comfortable coming back to our buildings. And it's a little harder in an existing building than it is in a brand new building. But Dan, I wanted to ask you, so all of these things that we're talking about cost, they're not causing construction costs to go down, but everyone seems to think that while pipeline is drying up a bit with less transactional volume for contractors, what do you foresee for construction costs? Because that's the real critical part to any of this. Pre-COVID, construction costs were getting to a point that it started to be very difficult to consider doing a spec office building because of the rents that were needed. Are you seeing any across, Denver, obviously specifically for this audience, but just across your platform, what are you seeing for construction costs?
Yeah, so, as the pandemic unfolded, construction costs were very volatile. We were getting increased costs, decreased costs, and until people kind of understood what the ramifications were, it was pretty hard to estimate, budget, bid anything, to the point where there wasn't a whole lot going on from anybody's standpoint, because I think everybody was at a little bit of a pause to see what conditions were going to be like as we came out of the pandemic. But as everybody knows, in the Denver market, the market's been booming, right? So every year it's what's the construction cost today, because it was changing on a monthly basis, increasing on a monthly basis prior to the pandemic. And, you know, we talked a lot in the past couple of years about, you know, workforce and shortage of workforce and how that's affecting construction costs. And you got contractors that were constantly trying to hire and improve upon the workforce issue that we did have here in Denver. And I think what really happened was the pause or the unknown future of the construction in the 6 to 12 month realm, and some of the projects being paused or put on hold. We have a lot of contractors now that have ramped up their workforce, because that was the projection over the past 4 or 5 years out here in Denver, that now have excess workforce. So now we actually see subcontractors being very aggressive on projects that we've started to bid, because in the construction world, we really didn't slow down, which is really reflective in my opening statement that this will be another record year for Brinkmann. But from our standpoint, we really see Q4 of this year and Q1 of next year kind of being the construction slower period, because those projects that were going to start, that developers and banks and tenants were looking to work on during the pandemic, they all paused as well. So I think you're going to see construction, in-place construction, slow down the next 6 months. As a result of that, you're going to see costs either be flat or come down as well. And a lot of the disciplines or the scopes that are going to decrease are really driven by the workforce. That subcontractors have ramped those workforce numbers up, and now they need jobs and projects to keep them employed and keep the company moving forward. So just in general, most of it's been flat. If we're budgeting and estimating for, you know, the next 6 to 12 months, I would consider your overall project numbers to be flat. A couple areas that we have seen some declines in, asphalt paving, that's more of a direct reflection of what's going on in the oil and gas sector. So we're seeing numbers around 5-6% lower post-pandemic than previously. But a lot of our carpentry scopes, acoustical ceiling, you know, not a big number, painting, gyp board, drywall, all of those are about 2%, 3% lower than what we typically see. So like I said, a lot of it's driven by the workforce. And then lastly, I know office buildings typically aren't wood construction and combustible, but that was one big market that did change post-pandemic. We saw increases in lumber prices go up 30 to 40%. And that was really driven by the shutdown of lumber mills, the shutdown of the border between us and Canada, which we get a lot of lumber from Canada. We're seeing those numbers start to creep closer to normal, but they're still 25, 30% higher than what we saw in 2019.
David, you mentioned you broke ground in July on a Salt Lake project. Was there any cost modifications to that, or were you already locked and loaded to start that July?
We were pretty close to locked and loaded. I would say that was a project that was pretty mature at that time. We'd been working with the general contractor over there and with a lot of their major subs for quite a while leading up to that groundbreaking. And so I think part of the reason that we pushed ahead was our confidence in where that number was going to be, combined with our belief in the Salt Lake market, which has many of the similar dynamics to Denver. And then frankly, the fact that we had a significant pre-lease with a deadline that we had to deliver. So
Yeah.
that helps. But You know, it was interesting listening, Dan, to you just a moment ago, talking about this kind of view over the horizon just a little bit into the next year or two. And it makes me think, my hot take of the day here for this discussion is that I think Denver dodged a bullet in terms of the timing of the COVID pandemic. Because, and what I mean by that is that I think we're very lucky that it happened this year and not 12, 18, 24 months in the future, when 2 to 3 million more square feet of spec office would have been under construction in downtown and Rhino alone. And if you can imagine, now we've got, you know, here in core Denver, we've got 4 large scale projects under construction. We've got Zlocki 162, obviously. We've got the Nichols Partnership project on Platt and 17th, McGregor Square, and then Rev 360 up in Rhino. It's a million and change, million and a quarter total square feet in those 4 spec buildings. But each of them is a fully differentiated product that has different characteristics, different floor plate size, different locational attributes. And I feel very good about Denver's ability to absorb those. But if we also had 8 more projects in Rhino, you know, multiple projects in Arapahoe Square and downtown, the knives would be out. And I think you'd see some really vicious cannibalization of rates, you know, here in the market that, you know, I was a little boy in 1983, 84, 85 when I was living here in the aftermath of the oil bust, but you know, I don't think Denver wants to see that sort of environment again. And so my hot take of the morning is that we dodged a bullet there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point for sure. I will say, going back to the pricing conversation, this is near and dear to my heart right now because we're actually in pricing mode for a handful of projects, including an office building. And I think we, like everyone, were anticipating that by this time of year, there would be some, you know, call it COVID discount that would start to get reflected in the pricing we were receiving. And I have to say, in most of our asset classes, that really hasn't materialized, at least not to the impact that we were thinking. So I agree. I mean, I think we're seeing flat for the most part. I think there's labor decreases, but materials increases that are offsetting them. So it's really hasn't materialized to a significant discount, not just in Denver, but in most markets, frankly.
Are you guys at the GMP stage for those, or is this initial pricing? Because the reason I ask is we've been looking at initial pricing and have not received, you know, really COVID discount. But I've heard enough to suspect that if we had a hard set of plans, you know, give us your best price now, that might be a little bit of a different story. But, you know, Dan might know more than I about the tricks of the trade there.
No, and just to jump in, you're exactly right, David. So, you know, subcontractors don't know if maybe Celeste, the project doesn't have a hard schedule or a hard start, or there's not bid documents like David suggests that, you know, here's all the details, give me a number, we're going to write a contract and start in a month. And then the subcontractors then look at their backlog, right, and say, oh man, I really need a job in a month. So then their price gets more aggressive. So I would agree, David. I think it's a great observation that, you know, pricing's initially probably pretty flat, but once you hit the market and it's a real project, and we're going to write subcontracts and move some dirt, then we are seeing a lot of it is, you know, we bid projects all the time, but last week we bid a project, we had 15 roofing bids. 15. And 10 of them weren't even solicited. So, I mean, people are out there are hungry. You got to still hire the right subcontractor, right? You got to hire the guy who can perform the scope of work. But David, I think your comment is spot on.
Well, it makes it hard to underwrite a deal because if you can't see over the hill there, you know, the question is, what can you assume? And if you can't assume the savings now because the GC community is saying, you know, pricing is not coming down, well, then it's hard for us to invest pre-development capital and push new projects forward. You know, I back to my own comment.
Back to where occupiers are, you know, they're really, I wouldn't use the term wait and see. They're trying to learn from this, and we're trying to figure out what is that office moving forward, right? What is the mix? You know, are we more shared space, more meeting rooms, more collective gathering spaces versus the number of fixed offices or not even offices, but dedicated spaces and shared spaces. And we don't know enough yet from where the businesses are going that they represent in terms of how their businesses are pivoting. So I think if you step it all the way back, the real challenge is the business demand and what they want to do and how that business wants to operate and shift. Really, the last 6 months, we've been in that wait and see, pause. Let's figure out how this is going to play out and what we learn from it. And then let's springboard and move forward. So I think, you know, just that occupier perspective is more, you know, what do we do next? And how do we get into that it isn't just, hey, I need 200 desks and X amount of square feet. It's how is this business operating? Because businesses have really, you know, they've all looked at this as a high degree of pivot or change. We've had a number of people say, heads of real estate tell us that throw away the last 10 years of what we learned about planning for real estate. We got to start from scratch. And so I think part of the challenge now and what you're dealing with in that pre-construction phase is we're still trying to figure out what it means and helping companies think through it. So I don't know if that provides some light onto the actual implementation phase of this, but the whole pre-planning thing has really been not on pause, but really cautiously, how does this shift based on the business needs shifting?
So Chris, I'm curious, are you seeing themes emerge across your corporate clients as they're rethinking and replanning the space? Are there consistent strategies that are starting to get adopted?
All very different. I mean, and you've read them all, from Microsoft last week coming out and saying we're all going to go home. You know, their employees are going to work from home, and then sort of retrenching off that, to others saying, you know, we're going to need more space to do that. But I can tell you the one thing that's consistent is they're all changing. That the way we think of open office today probably is not going to be the same in the next 3 to 5 years. And the use of that space is going to change, I think, as well, in terms of the emphasis of who comes into the office, and that office is going to become more about community, gathering, meeting, client interaction. That's the kind of theme I'm seeing emerge, with less about dedicated desk and more about either flex or office taking a different role in what a seat means. One person per seat, I think, is pretty much going to be out the door in the next 3 to 5 years. I just don't see it continuing.
I would disagree. It depends on the work type. I mean, if you're at a sales-based organization, they're not going to hot desk. I mean, CB is going through it right now. They're struggling to put their people back in the office because they don't know how to get there.
Because they don't have enough space.
And they don't have enough space. And so then you start jeopardizing culture, because if I can't have people in the office, there's no reason to go there. That's the benefit.
Well, that is your culture, though. You come to the office to meet, gather, you know, do the things you need to do as a group and collaborate. But it doesn't mean you need to sit there for 40 hours during a work week. That's my point. I think that whole dynamic, in some degree, to your point, maybe it doesn't go all the way to what I'm suggesting, but we're seeing a lot of companies, going back to Celeste's question, a lot of companies really considering, what is the square footage and the rationalization of the portfolio I need? Can I get this done through an on-demand flex space, or do I need a dedicated office to actually draw the people in? Can I give a temporary flex space where my teams meet, or do I need to be sort of in that office all the time? All I'm suggesting is those are the active conversations. And I believe they're going to continue to change and evolve as we emerge out of this.
I have a quick question, maybe digressing. How many people have had, or Chris, how many of your clients, I can tell you I haven't had any on a landlord side tour or on a tenant side tour. Not one person has asked me what we're doing to the building for COVID. We tell them, but I have not had any tenant walk in and go, well, gee, tell me why your building's better for post-COVID than someone else's.
I love being the moderator of this because I don't have to ask any questions. You guys are awesome, but I'm going to answer that question. We're getting asked a lot. And we're also seeing in RFPs a section now that says COVID and wellness. So I do think it's more front of mind. We're definitely getting asked it by existing customers that have near-term expirations because they want to understand if it's a safe place for them to stay. We're absolutely getting asked about it on tours for new customers. So, and it's the first time I got an RFP that had that section, I'm like, duh, I got to figure out something to put in here, So it's it does feel to me to be more front of mind than what you're experiencing, Jamie.
Is it local or national or both?
National.
I'd say both, but more national.
Yeah.
For sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, maybe it comes back to the conversation. I think the local people and maybe even the national, everybody's banking on a vaccine. So all these changes, I think, are like the amenities arms race. The millennials push new amenities, and we incorporated them into the building. The pandemic's going to push better air filtration and touchless entries and all these things that are just good business and healthy things that we should have going forward. And we're going to have new, cooler, better buildings after the pandemic is gone and the next thing comes.
Well, I have another shift in this too, which is sort of, if you look at a lot of companies where they have headquarters, hub, and then satellite type offices, I think the trend we're going to see as headquarters get smaller, what we're seeing is a lot of conversation is, what is a headquarters and what do you really need? Do you need all those people in it? So urban cores are really getting sort of questioned. If you look at San Francisco and New York in Q2 alone, negative 10 million square feet in absorption. People are really rethinking what's happening in that urban market. I think suburban markets, I never thought I'd say this, having lived through the first generation of corporate campuses. I think there's a great opportunity given the touch point and commutation of, do I really need to get into downtown versus can I be 10 minutes from home or have access to more amenities outdoors and things like more flexibility in the office footprint. I don't know what it's going to be. Less fixed and demise type space, more open type space could be a new trend and wave I see emerging. And then the whole notion of the small office, I think, is in real peril. I just think we're having companies where we're working through a lot of scenarios. If you're a company who has less than 25, 50 people, you're really questioning the need for an office moving forward. I think that those are the larger occupier typology type trends we're seeing emerge and questions we're working on.
We're starting to, okay, ahead, Jamie.
I was interesting. I know, Chris, your business is, big users. And so, yeah, if I'm Microsoft, I don't need an office for 25 people. But maybe this is the Cherry Creek microcosm, which is probably the most occupied office market in Denver right now. And it's full of 25-person offices, but they're small business. And those guys are going crazy. So you're right. The global corporation should have never had a 25-person office.
No, I agree. I think a lot of it, to your point, Jamie, and again, I'm bringing an enterprise sort of portfolio perspective. And I could see why Cherry Creek is such an amazing market for someone that is that blend between, not being quite downtown, but not being quite in the suburb, and having that opportunity to have great amenities, a walkability factor, easy access to get in and out of the city. I could see why that would make sense. And I also, again, I could see why all I'm pointing to is typically these kind of trends I'm speaking to tend to make their way in, right, to other companies or mid-size or smaller companies as well. So I agree with you. You know, I just wanted to give you that perspective of the kind of things that we're planning or working through right now.
So I'm just going to take a massive leap into hypothetical based on what you guys are describing, but I'm curious if Chris, Jamie, I mean, anyone, it feels like some of the dynamics we're talking about in that balance between remote work and office work, that may also very well be a factor in where you locate. In other words, if getting downtown is a hassle, that may mean that those companies are places where people want to remote work more, and their office space is going to configure differently. People that are now the Cherry Creeks or the near suburban, that office space, I think, is going to take potentially a different shape and form, because there's an expectation that those people may want to come in more because it's more convenient, and there are reasons. We never forget that no matter what type of business we're in, we're always a people business, and brain trusts are always better than solo work. So I think in cultivating that, it's going to be fascinating to me to see, is there an even more marked shift in the approach to space in the urban core versus the near urban or suburban?
I'm betting on it completely. Yeah. I think in large markets, it's the larger markets. I'm not sure Denver. I think Denver's going to benefit from the influx and it's going to offset. But I do think in larger markets, there's going to be a real interesting dynamic that you just described that may continue to push forward. So I mean, to me, for my teams, it's like the World Series, Super Bowl, and US Open all in one, right? We're trying to help companies think through this. And what we're saying is, we're not giving you the answer. We want to help you think through that kind of question. Where are your employees? What's best for work centers? How do we look at your workforce and rethink, again, not what's best for real estate, but what's best for that business? Because that's really, I think, what we're going to see is this great realignment to real business needs, to where potential supply may shift. And so that's what I'm excited about.
And it's interesting to think about this as well, though, because convenience is very relative, and a location in the Southeast Denver submarket might be very convenient to the C-suite or to certain tranche of the employee base, but there's really only one major submarket in Denver that's convenient to everywhere around Denver, and that's downtown. With its transit orientation and all the lines coming in. And this is not unique to Denver. It's the same thing in Houston. It's the same thing in Atlanta or Dallas. I think there's a lot of reason to suspect that certain rules of real estate may hold true, in terms of the fundamentals going forward. And three of those are location, location, location. Because a good building in a good submarket at a good location is going to be attractive, whether that's in one submarket or the other. As I think you'll really see differentiation along quality lines, which has to do with all the elements that we've been talking about so far, which include accessibility, convenience, transportation, but also health and wellness, access to light and air, amenities, and all this sort of thing. The ecosystem that Chris keeps referring to, I think you're going to find beneficial or attractive ecosystems differentiating themselves in different submarkets. And part of that will be
100% agree. I mean, I'm using the term place, not location, right? It's that whole placemaking experience, I think, is just going to continue to be elevated and continue to have importance. I mean, if we're going to learn anything from this whole experience, it's really sort of how we blend wellness, kindness, better places to work, and we get out of, the types of workplaces people aren't engaged and productive in. I mean, look at the Gallup surveys. 35% of America in general really is unengaged or they are engaged. That means 65% of the workforce isn't engaged in the work they do. Environment plays a key role in that. I truly believe that we are enablers for great business spaces, and trying to figure out how to improve on this, I think, is a great opportunity for everyone on this call and whoever's listening.
We are starting to get some questions in from the audience. I thought I would just, and this actually is a follow-on, is as you described, Chris, the more community-based interactive space. So much absorption in Denver has been to co-working, mostly WeWork. Those are having an extraordinarily hard time in this environment, because if you did need to be in the office and you only had a 30-day lease, you probably drop that lease. But what, this is to all the panelists, what are you seeing go forward for the co-working sector as such a major participant in our market? Not all at once.
Dive in.
Yeah, Chris, go for it.
I'm bullish on it. I'm not bullish on the model that may exist today, but I think the question of flex and flexibility in general, whether it's a lease or it's a more temporal or co-working type of environment, is just going to continue to be the trend. So the question of what a third place is, whether it's a brand like a WeWork or a IWG or an Industrious or any one of the co-working footprint providers out there, I think flexibility is going to continue to drive the demand for that, and maybe not in core markets, urban markets, but maybe start to find its way in some of the suburban type environments as well.
At Block 162, we're not going to lead with one of those, but we are absolutely strongly considering having such a space within the building to provide, just Chris, as you said, some flexibility for the tenancy within the building itself. Because right now we've witnessed firsthand the uncertainty that the tenant base has had with regard to their space planning needs. And just to be blunt, Block 162 is not going to be very well occupied when it delivers because of that uncertainty and the timing of our delivery. And every tenant that we were engaged with a an early mid 2021 occupancy pushed out to late 21 or 22 or as far as they could reasonably manage in order to get their heads around what they needed to plan for. And having seen some of those groups come back, a lot of them are asking for a little bit less space than they had originally come to us in January, February, and early March of this year. And so having a space like with a good business platform that's going to be reliable and that offers the right kit of parts and attributes that a tenant might want would give us or another landlord the opportunity to offer a pressure release valve, for tenant growth and expansion within an individual property. With that said, I think Denver is in a bit of a tough situation with the sort of gross scale market wide of some of the co-working organizations here. But I still think there's a place for it. I completely agree with you, Chris. There's a place for it for a lot of reasons that are going to remain intact going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I see it being 10 to 20% of a company's portfolio moving forward, where it may be 3 to 5% now because of what you said, the virtual campus, right? Where you may have a permanent stack and then take seats in a co-working environment to be able to deal with the flex. I mean, and that has to go with how work's changing too. More gig workers, more variable resources versus fixed. So all these things play into one another as it's evolving, from the impact of AI and automation taking jobs away or facilitating jobs to what the workforce is to how you source the workforce. And that I think those are all working those codes is why flex becomes sort of continued opportunity for companies to leverage.
So David, question for you. When you say you're going to potentially allocate some of your space in Block 162 to this flex, is that something that you as landlord would run, or will you look to bring in a co-working operator?
We'd likely look to bring in a stable, sophisticated co-working operator for that. That may change over time. And, you know, I know that certain other companies have looked at operating that themselves. We may wind up doing that in the future, but it's not currently our intention. What we have done with that amenity suite that I mentioned earlier is we've kind of got a bit of a hybrid version of that ad hoc already, but it's not a direct replacement or stand-in for that.
Got it. Another question we've gotten from the audience, and we only have like 9 minutes left, so you guys have been awesome just keeping this conversation going. Is just to follow on to the wellness rating. I think we mentioned earlier that it might be great to have a sticker on your building that says this has been wellness rated from a comfort standpoint. Do you guys have obviously LEED was that on the sustainability side that became the standard? Is anyone of the panelists seeing a particular, you mentioned, I think, Chris, Fitwell, our well building standards, is there a particular standard that you think we're headed towards in terms of that rating provider?
I'm not sure I could suggest one or the other, but what I could suggest is there's opportunity to continue to drive differentiation and grow more capabilities to provide that service. I think that it's going to become more in demand over time. And I do believe it should include sustainable measures as well. So I don't think it's one or the other. To me, it's about a holistic rating of the type of place you're providing.
Yeah, I can't say that a standard has seemed to emerge yet in that, although if I get asked a question or if I see a building in Denver that's marketing the strategy, it does seem to lean towards a well rating. And then within well, obviously you've got your certification levels and then this health and safety rating that I mentioned before that is a direct outcome of COVID, which you don't necessarily have to get a full well rating to get the health and safety rating. So I think to your point, Chris, they're still working even within those platforms to refine those strategies. But I do think at least early on this year, that seems to be the tool that I'm hearing the most, getting the most questions about.
Yeah.
We have some projects. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
We have projects that are going well, and now we're starting to hear more about Fitwell, just because I think it's maybe a little easier to get and a little lower cost.
Yeah.
But I think that transition from LEED to whatever is happening mostly because code has captured much of LEED. It's hard to build a non-LEED building these days. But how you operate and maintain and pay attention to air quality and cleanliness and outdoor daylighting and fresh air, that is probably what more tenants are interested in. So we're seeing well or Fitwell or whatever the next evolution is of more of that occupancy driven certification.
Another question that's come in from the audience is, we talked a good bit about ground up construction costs. We didn't talk much about tenant improvement costs. And as Chris and Jamie talk about changing space needs, and the need for flexibility in shorter term leases, the tenant improvement costs are a little bit counter to a shorter term lease flexibility structure. So I guess, Dan, this is really a question for you. Are we seeing more or less moderation in tenant improvement costs than ground up at this time?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the brief breakdown I gave, right? So much of a tenant improvement is driven with the finishes and the carpentry and the labor force. So I would say in general, the TI numbers have gone down from a competitive standpoint, but it's also, like we have touched base on as well, as material prices are going up as well. So unfortunately, Celeste, there's no huge COVID post-pandemic savings that is out there. But there's also not a whole lot of big surprises either as it pertains to increases in construction for tenant finish build out. will like to piggyback on the last hour and a half here, though, is, you know, a big component of that is what is the mechanical systems? What's the existing system, and what systems does the tenant and its employees desire to have from a wellness standpoint? So those all have cost impacts as well.
And then question for Chris and Jamie, how are you advising your clients on the occupier side relative to near-term space needs? So if there's a near-term expiration, are you seeing that they want 1 or 2 years? And from a development perspective, the inability to get long-term leases is going to hamper folks being able to develop and get long-term leases are needed for new development. What are you seeing relative to near and short-term needs for your, and this is a follow-on also, Chris, for you with it changing so much that everyone's trying to figure it out. How can a developer build a new building without having a better feel for what duration of term a potential tenant may want? Chris, I think that starts with you.
Yeah, I'm thinking because there's no, to me, it's, and I know it's going to change the valuation, the rates, but if you look at parts of Asia, you know, you see 2 to 3 year leases being the norm, right? You see a whole different way of looking at the use of space. And I don't know the answer to this, but I would tell you that the more flexibility that can be driven into a lease, is really going to be the continued trend. Obviously, it's been a trend with CFOs and companies really sort of driving to have that as core to a lease. But I think the length of term, given the amount of uncertainty we have with the way businesses operate and the duration of businesses today in terms of product life cycles, I just continue to see it being a major force and a driver in defining the ask for major tenants, and those who can deliver on that are the ones that are going to win. When you look at a scorecard of how you assess the value of a particular project across location, financials, access to talent, things like that, you know, the financials are always a majority of that scorecard, and flexibility is becoming more and more important in being able to solve that. So sorry, Stephanie, I didn't mean to semi-punt on your question. It just, the only thing I could tell you is flexibility is going to, and agility is going to continue to drive occupiers' mindsets as we emerge out of COVID.
David, are you seeing the resurged interest in Block 162 looking for shorter terms, or are you still seeing the traditional longer term deals?
So far, we're seeing a willingness to look at longer term. In fact, 10 to 12 year lease terms are kind of the norm for us right now amongst the tenant group that we're engaged with at the present moment. We have definitely seen asks for optionality at, say, year 7, year 8, year 5 sometimes, which we don't like as much. But we've so far been engaged with mostly law firms who are mostly groups with a significant presence here in downtown and are having to compete with other law firms for talent. And the ones that are coming out of or have leases expiring at older buildings are really looking to differentiate themselves amongst their peer group. We're also engaged with tech firms. Many of those are coming from out of state, at least in these initial conversations. And then the third major tranche is sort of finance and investments, and those are sort of a combination of local and out of state groups. Those three tranches of the market are perhaps a bit distinct from other types of users. And I guess we'll see what unfolds here over the next few months and how that might evolve.
All right. I think we've hit our 9:30 mark. I want to thank the panelists. You guys were really easy to moderate. Yeah, started asking the questions, but really, really interesting information. It's a really interesting time to think about how to design and build an office building. And really great insights from everybody. So thanks so much. Sarah, I don't know if there's wrap up that you want to do or what happens next.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Just a few more announcements, but again, thank you, Stephanie, for moderating today and each of our panelists. So just a really fascinating discussion. I'd like to acknowledge once more today's program sponsors, Transwestern, The Whites Company, and Polsinelli. I'd like to encourage attendees to complete the post-webinar survey and to visit the NAIOP website at naioPcolorado.org for details on upcoming events and programs. A recording of today's webinar will also be available on the website by early tomorrow. And please mark your calendar for November 18th for the final installment of the Mind the Development Gap webinar session, where we will focus on retail development. Also, next Thursday, October 29th, please join us for our virtual property tour and case study featuring North Wynkoop, presented by Westfield Company. And registration is now open for those webinars. Please visit the NAIOP website for details. And thanks again for joining us.